Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to be talking through one of the questions from the 2018 grade 10 paper 1. I'm going to be looking at this graphing question just so we can get a feel for how we answer these types of questions. So my first thing when I look at a graphing question is let's just try to get a feel for what graphs I'm actually working with. So sketch below are the graphs of f of x, which is ax squared plus q. As soon as I see that x squared, I know I'm working with a parabola. Okay, which just by knowing that, I know kind of some of the tips I might have picked up in class with parabolas. And then the second function I've got here is this g of x. And with g of x, I can see I've got this little x up here. So this is an exponential function. Okay, again, might not help us straight away, but it's just good to have it in the back of our mind. So we can see f of x is kind of this unhappy face going there. Okay, that's the shape for f of x, and g of x is this exponential function dropping off here. A and b are the x-intercepts of f, so we can just see, okay, this parabola crosses the x-axis here. So what we know straight away is we don't know what the x value is, but we do know that the y value when it touches the x-axis is 0. Okay, the same at a. So we've got some x value that we don't know, and the y value will be 0. The graphs intersect at A. Okay, so these two, G and F, they cross each other here at A. And the point E13 lies on F. Okay, so they're just giving us a point that we might use later. C is the turning point of F. So here we can see it turns at the turning point. Because it is in line with 0, we know that x is 0. We don't know what y is, but we could work that out. And then D is the y-intercept of G. Okay, so at the y-intercept, again, we know that x is 0, and we just got to work out what that y value is. The first question they say is write down the coordinates of D. Okay, so quite useful that we've already picked that out. So we already know that the x is going to be 0. So we know it's going to be something like 0, and then we're going to work out this y value. Okay, so let me get a different color pen. Let's try work through this function and get this missing point there. So that point D is on the exponential function, which means that I'm going to be using that function g of x. Okay, let me write it up here. So we know that g of x is equal to a half to the power of x minus 4. Now we are trying to find point D, so we know at point D, x is 0. So let's just rewrite this. So we're going to say y is equal to a half. X we're going to put in 0 minus 4. And now it's just a case of we don't have any unknowns except for the y, so we can now solve for this missing y value. So we're going to say y is equal to, now this part here, we have to try remember our exponent laws. So whenever we have anything to the power of 0, it just becomes 1. Okay, so a half to the power of 0 just becomes 1, and we still got that minus 4. And so we get y is equal to minus 3. Okay, so we know at this point D, when x is 0, then y is minus 3. So that is our first 2 marks. Quite nice and straightforward there. The second question, the range of G, they usually ask a question about the range in these types of questions. So if we get a highlighter quick, the range means all the values that G can have, all the y values. So if we look at G here, it goes all the way here from this point here, whatever this asymptote is. Okay, so we get all the y values from this asymptote, and it just goes all the way up. Okay, and it just keeps going. We assume it just goes up to infinity. Okay, so what we're going to look at is we're going to look back at our exponential function, because that is this g again. And in an exponential function, if I just write it here, just so we can see it, g of x is equal to a half x minus 4. So in an exponential function, we have always got this value here is actually our asymptote. Okay, so that is the lowest y value. So the graph is going to be approaching this minus 4. So we can see all along here it is approaching this minus 4, but it never actually touches that. Okay, so we can say that the range for this function is y has to be greater than minus 4. Okay, so it's all these values. So it could be minus 3, could be minus 2. And it could be any of these values up here. So 1, 2, it just keeps going to infinity. So our range is just everything bigger than -4. Okay, so I've just cleared it up a little bit so we can look at the next question. So in 5.2, they ask us calculate the coordinates of A. Okay, so we already said A has a y value of 0. So we're just trying to work out this x value. Now A is on both functions. So it is on the g function and on the f function. What I'm going to say is we use the g function this time because in that f function we still got that missing a and q. So that's not going to help us very much. So let's just try set out this g function. So we can say g of x again is equal to this half x minus 4. And we're just going to plug in what we've got again. So we know, well, we don't know the x value here, but we know the y value is 0. So we can plug that in. So 0 is equal to this whole thing, or half x minus 4. And now we are trying to solve for x. So we probably, when you see it in a situation like this, when x is in the exponent position, we know we're going to have to use some exponent laws. The first thing I would do here is take this minus 4 across. Okay, so then we can have, if we take it across, it's going to become positive 4. So we're going to have 4 is equal to this half x. Okay, which is helpful, but to be honest, we need to try and use some exponent laws to get it so we can actually find what that x is. So the first exponent law I'm going to use is if I take this 2 up to the top, so if I switch the order of this fraction, I can just say 4 is equal to 2 to the minus x. Then the second thing I can do is, let's just say 4, I can rewrite that as 2 squared. So 2 squared is equal to 2 to the negative x. And as soon as we have it in this form, it's looking really good for us to figure it out then. So if we have the bases are the same, so here we've got 2 at the bottom of both of them, then according to our exponent laws, we can just say that these top exponents are equal. Okay, so I'm just going to write on this side just so we can see. So we can say then that 2 is equal to minus x, which means that x is equal to minus 2. Okay, so we've just taken this exponential function, used 2 exponent laws, and now we've gotten to this point. Okay, so we can then write the coordinates of A. So A is going to have an x value of minus 2 and a y value of 0. And we can always check that. So if we look at the position of A on this graph, it is in the negative x value, so it makes sense then that that has a negative x value of negative 2 there. The next thing we can look at is how to work out the values of A and Q. So I'm just going to clear up the screen a bit and then we can have a look at that one. Okay, the next question we're going to have a look at is we're trying to find these values of A and Q. So we're actually trying to figure out what are the values in this parabola. So conveniently, we're missing 2 values. So we're missing A and Q. So when we're missing 2 values, it means we need 2 equations and 2 points to solve it. So we've got point A and point E. And what we're going to do is we're going to sub these points into this function or this equation for f and try and see if we can find these A and Q. So it's almost a little bit like simultaneous equations. So first of all, if we just keep on the side, let's sub in point A. Okay, so f of x, so that means y, we've got A, it's 0. So we're going to say 0 is equal to A, x is minus 2 squared plus q. Okay, then we just simplify as much as we can. So we're going to have 0 is equal to A minus 2 squared is 4. So we're going to have 4A plus q. And so we could get q is equal to minus 4A. Okay, that's all we've got for now. Let's just label this equation 1 and we're going to see what we can do with point E now. So if we sub in point E into the same equation, so into this f of x, we're going to have our y value is 3. So 3 is equal to A. Our x value is 1 squared plus q. And let's see how we get with simplifying. So 3 is equal to 1 squared, so it's just 1, so A plus q. What we can then do is we have now got two equations. So we've got this equation 1 and equation 2. So we are solving simultaneous equations. So what I would say is we know the value of q. Okay, so let's sub this q into this equation 2. So somewhere, just make a note of what you're doing so the examiner can see what you're doing. So let's sub 1 into equation 2. Okay, so wherever there's q, we are going to replace it with this minus 4a. So we have got 3 is equal to a, and then instead of the q, we're going to have minus 4a. So we find that 3 is equal to 1a minus 4a is minus 3a. And then we can just solve for a. So if we take this minus 3 across, we're going to go 3 divided by that minus 3 gives us minus 1. So a is equal to minus 1. Okay, already that is making sense because if that a is minus 1, so if we look back at this function here, if it is minus 1x squared, that would explain why we have kind of this unhappy face or sad face for the parabola. Now all we need to do is find q. Okay, so let's just keep this in the back of our mind. That is a. Now what I would do is I would sub this a back into this equation 1 here. Okay, so we can say sub a into equation 1, just keeping track of it. And so we're going to say q is equal to minus 4 times a, so minus 1. So q is going to be minus 4 times minus 1. Q is just 4. So we've got both of those values that they asked for there. So a and q. So when you then write it, you can just put it as, let's say, a is equal to minus 1. Q is equal to 4. What I would also say, just for your own reference, is somewhere put down, so now we know this function f of x. So f of x is equal to minus 1x squared plus 4. Okay, just so we've got, this is the actual function we're going to work with now. I hope that was helpful so far. I will go through the rest of the points in the rest of the questions in a later video, but let me know if you have any questions in the comments.